Why do you think the Memphis territory never ran a stadium show for some of their big matches? And did Jerry Jarrett ever consider buying the Knoxville territory and taking over the entire state of Tennessee?
No. First of all, I'm sure he didn't. I mean, I can't read his mind, but I can speak for him, because when Jerry started his own company, broke off from Nick Gulas in 1977, Ron Fuller gave him a ton of help and support, and he did to Ron as well in terms of bringing guys over from the Knoxville territory. Ron was the son of Buddy Fuller, who was Jerry Jarrett's business partner. The territory was doing great. Ron wouldn't have wanted to sell it. And then finally, when the split came in Knoxville, where Orton and Roop and Malenko and those guys left, and exposed the business in Knoxville, it killed the business in Knoxville. As we have recounted, as Ron Fuller on his Studcast recounts, by 1979, Jerry Jarrett wouldn't have taken the Knoxville territory if he gave it to him, because once the business had been exposed in the newspapers and they knew the behind-the-scenes shit, the people just left. And then Barnett tried to run it from the Georgia office, but too much damage had been done, and Flair and Blackjack Mulligan bought it, I think, in 81. And the deal was that Crockett was going to give them Roanoke and Harrisonburg and some other towns up that 81 corridor to make it a bigger territory, but they couldn't get it going. And then by the time that Ron came back in a few years later, after the taste had gotten out of people's mouth and started, Continental back up, Jerry had all he could, take care of over in Memphis. So that would have never been a thought, I don't think, in anybody's mind. What was the first part of that question?
Why did the Memphis territory never run a stadium show for some of their big matches?
Here's the thing. They were running an 11,000-seat building in Memphis every week, 52 weeks a year. And they were doing quite well for most of that time. But when you think about it, if they could, a stadium, the Liberty Bowls, it was next door to the Mid-South Coliseum and seated 60 or 70 something thousand people. Mark James could tell us exactly how many. The only time there was ever a wrestling show in that building in that stadium was when Crockett ran the 86 Great American Bash there without cooperation from Lawler. So they drew 1,500 people in a 70,000 seat stadium, and that was never tried again. To bring in, if you had doubled the crowd that you were drawing at the Mid-South Coliseum for a big show at the stadium, say you drew 20,000 people instead of 10,000, the expenses would have been 5 times as much. There was never a reason why that would have made economic sense in the Memphis territory. Now, other territories that ran stadium shows, they didn't have a building in town that could seat the number of people that they were going to draw. And so they took the gamble, but they were not usually weekly territories. They were usually monthly territories where you had time to build and prepare. Or, when Crockett ran the bashes in stadiums, some of those were ill-advised. Some of them worked, but it was a situation where they were only there in that town, 8 or 10 times a year. So it just economics. It would have not made any sense at all. And in Lexington, the second biggest drawing city per show for the Memphis territory, Rupp Arena seated 23,000 people. It is the biggest pretty much arena in the Southeast. So why would you go out of that when you're not filling it up? And that's in a town at that time that barely had 250,000 people in it. And they were drawing 8,000 or 6,000 or whatever per show. In Louisville, you wouldn't even had to go into a stadium because they ran the Gardens. And even when they sold the Gardens out, the next step would have been Freedom Hall, and they tried that once, and it was Christmas night, which was a good time to draw, but there was no tradition, and they did about the same crowd that they would have in the Gardens, and never tried that again. So there was no economic sense to it whatsoever.